Board interviews, how important are they and how much of an impact do they make on your hiring process? Let's discuss. Before we jump into it, listen, those gifts are down below. First one, getting started as a police officer. It's going to walk you through every step of the hiring process. Trust me, if you're already in the process, you're going to want to watch this because it's going to help you with the next step along the way. If you haven't started, definitely watch this because this is going to make sure that you don't make any of the mistakes that you could possibly make that will, one, get you disqualified before you even start, or two, mess you up down the line, especially when you get to the background interview process and the background check. Also, the other gift, if you have something more personal or specific question tailored to you, is our free coaching call down below where you can jump on a Zoom call with me. I'll walk you through it. Anyway, let's jump in and discuss board interview questions. Okay, you've made it to a board interview or a panel interview. Maybe you only have to do one, maybe you have to do multiple, but you finally made it to the board interview. You may have had to go through a written test, a physical test, maybe you did the NTN. It doesn't matter. You finally made it to the board interview. How is this going to impact your testing, or how's it going to impact your hiring process for the rest of the, let's just say, the time you're going through as a police candidate? And ultimately, it can be the deciding factor. Getting to the board interview can be difficult in itself. Sometimes they'll only take the top candidates in the written or physical test if they make you do those first. But if you're at the board interview, now is the critical moment. This is going to decide whether or not you get an offer or you move forward with the process. And you've heard me say before about conditional offers and what they are, and getting a conditional offer after a board interview means that you are slotted for this position. And as long as you don't fail any other conditions of your conditional offer, then you will be hired on as a police officer and go through the academy for that agency if you're needing to go through an academy. So you go into the board interview. One thing you should probably do is dress professionally, and not probably, you definitely need to dress professionally, but you're going through and you're trying to decide how to answer these questions and what questions are going to be on there. You're going to need to know everything that you can about this department that you're applying to. And specifically when it comes to their mission statement, doesn't have to be memorized, but you're definitely going to want to know it. You're going to want to know their core values. Definitely memorize those. Those are usually 3 words or 3 phrases: honor, courage, commitment, things like that. You're going to want to know who the chief of police is, or the sheriff, or whoever the highest official sworn officer is in that department or agency. These are things that are going to make you stand out a little bit when they ask you, what do you know about our agency? Preferably know the size and how many members are in the department, specifically sworn members, or maybe just in general, hey, this is an agency of 500 members, 100 civilians, and 400 sworn officers. That's good information to know right there. And that makes you stand out for that specific question. But what about these other questions that are coming up? What about the questions where it says, what are you going to do if you run into this scenario, or how would you handle this scenario? If you've never been through a police academy or you've never been a police officer, then you might not know how to answer that question. I mean, how would you know? What do you do when an individual starts shooting at you and shoots your partner, but then throws their hands up? How do you handle that situation? Well, common sense could tell you a few things, but where would you go? Would you switch from a firearm to a taser? Things along those are kind of almost trick questions for anyone who has never been through a police hiring process, or I should say through a police academy or any type of police training. You're not going to know how to answer that type of situation. So it's best to understand how to answer a question like that on the police board based on the experience level that you do have. One question you might see is, how do you handle this scenario where you're transporting a subject to jail that you just arrested and you come across a motor vehicle accident? How do you handle that specific question? I mean, what do you do? And they add a little context and say, hey, the motor vehicle accident, appears to have serious injury. Well, what do you do? How do you answer that? Most people are going to come up with, well, I might just stop just to see if everyone's okay and then just continue transporting as soon as everyone's okay. Or you might say, hey, I have a prisoner transport, so I'm not paying any attention to it. Neither one of those is going to be the right answer, and either one of those answers could get you disqualified immediately from the hiring process. They won't tell you that, but they're going to give you a zero for that situation, because you need to be balanced as a police officer. You need to have compassion, but still understand law and policy. So a good answer specifically for a question like that is, well, I would probably slow down enough to make sure that I can get good tangible information and intelligence and relay that back to dispatch, or possibly another emergency response unit where I can call in and advise dispatch, hey, uh, I'm passing at location X, severe motor vehicle accident, there appears to be injuries, I'm in the middle of prisoner transport. From what I could see, it was two vehicles hit on a head-on collision, and I am going to continue with prisoner transport. Please send EMS and other officials as soon as possible. And then they say, well, why are you finishing up with the prisoner transport when there's suspected injuries? And you say, well, because by policy, and most policies will have it that you cannot stop for anything other than an accident that you're involved in with a prisoner transport. That's a very easy answer, and you're not going into needing knowledge as a law enforcement officer how to answer that. And that's how you're going to handle every board question that comes your way, especially scenario based, is you're going to answer it based on logical compassion, right? How would an individual with no experience handle this situation? Well, I would immediately notify dispatch of what I see. I'd gather as much information as possible without stopping. I would slow up maybe a little bit to gain a little bit more information, but I wouldn't stop my transport, and I would make sure that I'm doing so, safely. At that point in time, I'd relay back to dispatch all the information I have, and I'd follow policy and continue my transport with my arrestee. End of story. And that's how you're going to have to handle, like I said, each one of these scenario based questions. There's a lot more questions that they'll ask you, and questions that you need to be prepared for. Questions such as, what's your greatest weakness, or what's something you need improvement on? What do you know about our agency? As I said before, that's another big one. What can you tell me about the responsibilities of a law enforcement officer? All these are questions you're going to get asked, and all these are questions that you should probably be prepared to answer. And more, I've seen departments asking questions that are scenario based, questions that honestly, unless you've been a cop before or you've been through a police academy, you're not really equipped to answer. So you have to find a way to answer these questions without running into situation where you may be saying, one, the wrong thing, or two, not clearly articulating what you mean and not really answering the question. Now, if you do run into these type of questions and you're not prepared, it can really mean the difference between whether or not they give you a conditional offer or move you along in the process, or they say, hey, we appreciate your time, but you're not among the most qualified individuals. Please apply again some other time. And then you just wasted 2, 4, 5, or 6 months in the hiring process with this department that you wanted, only to say, hey, you're not our best qualified candidate right now. But the actual board interview is the deciding factor whether or not you get hired. So if you just squeak by on the physical and you just squeak by on the written, but you make it to the board, that's the spot where you're really going to have a chance to make an impact. And we've covered this before about making sure you show up in a suit and tie and you're properly prepared and you're early and you have all the information beforehand, but you need to practice these board interviews. If you want a little bit more information, take our Getting Started as a Police Officer workshop down below. It's going to walk you through each part of the hiring process, including the board interview, and it's going to give you a little bit more information for what you need to know going through the process. That little bit right there can be the difference between you getting a conditional offer or not. If you have more specific questions, you're always able to reach out for our free coaching call. That's also down below. Both of these are my gifts to you. You can reach out, contact me directly, and we'll set up a Zoom call where we can go over things that are specific to your situation. preferably do it before you apply, because I can help you before you make the mistake of filling out your questionnaire wrong, or putting down information that could be technically written another way, or even getting your resume prepped the right way so that you stand out, so you can make it to the interview board. As always, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.